Hey, this is Sabrina Monarch. I want to slow down with this moment of time here and make a video about it and focus on Saturn being in the 29th degree of Pisces and moving from this critical threshold to the very end of the zodiac to the first degree of the zodiac in 0 degrees of Aries. This transition happens on February 14th when Saturn moves into Aries. We did have Saturn in Aries briefly earlier this year, or sorry, in 2025. And then it retrograded back. So this time when Saturn moves into Aries, it will be the final time. So we're not going to have Saturn in Pisces for another 28 and a half years. And it's not just Saturn changing signs, it's Saturn exiting the very end of the zodiac and beginning a new cycle. So I'll show you the chart of the moment real quick here. We have Uranus rising for this video in particular, as I'm recording it. But at any rate, what we're looking at is Saturn at 29 degree of Pisces. It is going to form a conjunction with Neptune on February 20th. I just did a video with S.J. Anderson on this channel. And I also have an interview with Ariana Felix where we talked about Saturn and Pisces and basically like learning lessons all the way. Playfully, we titled this podcast episode, which you can find on my channel, To Be or Not to Be a Dumb Bitch, as in there is spiritual insights that come through when we actually live our lives and make mistakes and, to be, quote, a dumb bitch. And that we can't really see ourselves or have our ego revealed to us unless we actually have life experiences. So before I get ahead of myself in that, let me just back up here and ask you to please like this video, subscribe. And if you're new here, I, orbit around a point and talk in a kind of broad Piscean way, and then we arrive somewhere. So just tune in, relax, and we'll go for a ride. And today we're going to get philosophical. I'm going to talk about the concept of dying well, and that we're basically dying in our lives over and over again. Death and rebirth, the beginning of the day, the end of the day. It's like there's all these symbolic endings and beginnings that we move through in life. And in terms of planetary cycles, the ending and the beginning always bleed into each other. That we don't have these super complete endings and super new beginnings all of the time, that there's like a blending or a watercolor or a bleed. And so we carry into new cycles what we haven't completed learning from the past. This is the concept of karma and in reincarnation as well, the idea that you began this life as a new person, this current incarnation identity, but you bring with you things from the past that are unresolved. And so in this lifetime, something that can be really, my spiritual path and the kind of spiritual path that I teach, it's not about doing this life perfect so that you get a better next life, or doing this life perfect so you go to heaven and avoid hell. These things are happening in this lifetime, as in the lessons that life is trying to show you, the ways that life is naturally confronting you, right? And you can make yourself more available as a vessel for these lessons with your openness and your discernment, right? Like your ability to actually receive life as it's coming to you, your ability to participate, your ability to really be engaged in your experience here, as opposed to being in numbness, dissociation, just constant resistance, or having these ways that you're really guarding yourself from your own life experience. If you are receptive to life, like if you are allowing life to shape and carve you, then as you go through experiences, you're constantly learning lessons here on Earth. You can experience this with a lot of despair and just, kicking and screaming the whole way, really a lot of resistance, and it can be blissful. So maybe in your experience, it's been some mix of both. But at any rate, life is happening. And instead of being in these frozen narratives that life is just like happening to you, or that it's random, or that it's unfair, or all of these kinds of things, getting really reflective and contemplative and dropped in, and maybe having spiritual tools like astrology has been profound in this way for me, but I also draw from a lot of disciplines to have the ability to reflect, what is life trying to show me? And when you successfully harvest the learnings from your life experiences, when you turn your life experiences into reflection and wisdom, and it settles down into your body, right? Like it lands, then life happens in new ways after that. For me, this has been the gift of Saturn moving through Pisces. I've described it a few times on my channel as like the ocean waves slowed down. So, experiences that have habitually throughout my life brought me a lot of overwhelm, places I've gotten so carried away and ungrounded and kind of lost at sea, that led to a lot of confusion and a lot of questions, a lot of seeking for answers. I found nervous system technologies and erotic cultivation technologies that allowed me to get very granular and very tapped in with my own body and nervous system to the point where time started operating differently for me, where I was able to receive my experiences, receive my relational experiences to such a level of it clicking, right? What was happening for me, that in new experiences, new connections, or new chapters of existing connections, I was able to actually make different choices instead of repeating the same old patterns over and over again. So, we're all learning this in various ways in our lives, right? Everyone has these kind of core life themes, these threads that you keep spiraling around, right? Like if you reflect on your life experiences, you'll find these kind of core patterns that you've orbited around. And as you successfully glean the wisdom and the insight from these things, your life opens up and expands, and you have new opportunities and whatnot. So, this is what's happening at the threshold of death and rebirth. And this is happening at various intervals throughout our lives as well, when certain things end. A relationship ends, a career ends, a training that you're in ends, a significant, portal that you've been moving through around like a grief process transitions or turns over. And the quality of our consciousness in this transition is very mystical and spiritual in nature. I'm inspired by, I don't know a ton about this. This is what I learned from Brynja Magnuson's book. I'm forgetting the title, but it's something about these archetypes of the feminine. And the way she speaks of the bardo from the Tibetan Book of the Dead is something that I think about or come back to a lot when I think about the transition between death and rebirth. So the concept, again, I might be ignorant here. I'm going off of something I read, and I'm sure there's a lot more to this tradition, and I would benefit from researching it more. My understanding is that there is a concept that in the moment of death, there is that tunnel, right? Moving toward the light. And that with significant trust in the process, being willing to kind of go all the way to the end of the tunnel. And so that could be through an emotion like joy, trust, surrender, faith. That the end of the tunnel leads you to a better next life. And that if you get scared, right, if the experience of death, just imagine, like we don't know, at a physical level, the confusion of changing form like that, right? So being scared and jarred, right? And not having preparation for this either. That the being who is dying gets scared, takes an early exit instead of making it all the way to the end of the tunnel, and then reincarnates into a life where they're repeating their same problems over again, or maybe regressing or something like that. And so, if I'm understanding correctly, there's also spiritual practices that go along with the preparation for death. One of them, if I am getting this correct, is a dreaming practice, like being able to consciously fall asleep. As in, when you're sleeping and you just eventually lose consciousness, actually being able to stay awake and lucid as you transition from, laying down and closing your eyes to actually being in a stage of sleep. And that through change, right? Another way that this shows up, again, I'm informed by Brynja Magnuson's writing on this. Yin Mysticism is the name of the book. Is that in transitional places in life, right? Like you're moving through a grief portal or something's ended, you're in this kind of nebulous, unsure territory, that this is a place that we also get scared. And that inside of the uncertainty, in our fear, we might grip onto premature meaning, right? And take one of those early exits and not make it all the way to the light. Versus in times of unknown, in times of transition, when you're able to cultivate a sense of joy, able to cultivate trust, you're able to be with the uncertainty, that it carries you further into the tunnel and into, the next life experience that you are dreaming of. So this teaching, actually, like I was reflecting on this a lot during the last eclipse season and just kind of catching myself, and you can play with this too, of like when the experience that you're having starts to get looser and lose form, right? Like people experience this, say you're in college or something like that, and you have this routine, your life is kind of in student mode, and then you graduate or you're about to graduate, and there's this uncertainty about your next, career, where you're going to live, things like this, or the end of a relationship, things like this. And that kind of going into it with this like trust and like building the rocket velocity to be like, and life is happening again, right? Like I get very attached to good moments in time. I'm a little bit, of Cancer South Node. I can be, prone to nostalgia or things like this. And so it's like the end of a really good summer and the sadness of that, or like the end of a really good vacation, the end of a really sweet moment, and playing with ideas like, upwards from here, or like more beautiful things to come, right? Or like, yay, that was so great. I'm excited for what life wants to show me next, and like, not collapsing into this kind of tragic mindset that something beautiful has passed. So essentially, I've unpacked this a little bit, but I just wanted to illustrate that the transition from Pisces to Aries, or like the ending of a cycle into the beginning of a cycle, is actually like a really rich ceremonial portal. Something that I shared. Actually, I'm not going to go down that path. Or reeling myself back here. So essentially, what I want to ground in that is to reflect on our consciousness inside of transition, and that there's not maybe a lot of actions happening inside of transition, but there are orientations or ways that we're resonating our consciousness that can be very impactful. I don't want you to get perfectionistic about this or worry that if you do the ending or the transition wrong, that you're like, not setting yourself up well for the future, but to actually just play with how can you respect the portal of the unknown, and where can you open a bit or more to the sensation of it, as opposed to contracting and getting rigid at the end. And so, inside of grief, which is another good metaphor for this, um, emotions can pass, it's like those like watery, warm tears and like that sense of clearing and openness in your body where you're like really feeling the way that something mattered to you. You're really feeling how it touched you. You're really feeling something and kind of like the purity and the beauty of that and how much it opens and dilates you versus the parts of the grief process where we are rejecting, we're judging that we feel a certain way. And the release and the tears look more like a struggle, which is fine too. We don't have to, that is part of the process. But that sense that it's like not coming through an open channel, but it's like facing these parts of us that hate that we're feeling this way. We're frustrated. We're mad at ourselves. We're mad at God, like all these kinds of things. And how ultimately, the more and more we surrender, we just get to this place of, wow, I really loved that time in my life, or I really loved that person, and it aches that it's gone. It aches that that person is gone. And I'm opening to the love that I felt and the love that's still here now. Right? That it's like you can fight and you can grip, and ultimately it leads to release. And the release doesn't mean that everything's better. It just means that we no longer are fighting the reality of how much we love. So let's take a little bit of a turn here, because what I've been noticing from um, the field, from conversations, um, from the whispers, from the sense of what's happening, is that the end of Pisces here with Saturn and Neptune was also there as a bit of a typhoon. Like, I have placements in these degrees natally. I have Venus, Mercury at the end of Pisces. And so I understand that swirl very well. It's like my home turf. But that being said, when an experience or a chapter in life is coming to a kind of completion and pivot point into a new story, that's when the rush of the content of the whole narrative comes through. And that's a lot for our nervous system to hold at any given point. And so sometimes people spin out and spiral. People can even struggle with types of psychosis or spiritual psychosis when meaning making and content gets so saturated and we have a hard time processing and digesting it and go into a place of overwhelm. So if that's happening, I mean, I think in a long-term sense, what's really important with that is gaining nervous system literacy, like learning how to have safety in our bodies. It's also having communal networks. And it's developing the part of you that actually can be a student, right? That you can have teachers and mentors in your life that help you bear the existential weight of your experience. That is a faculty, right? To be receptive to that and to also find your people, your teachers. And it's also building communities where you can bear the weight of experiences together, right? That you have people that when you share your heart with them, when you share your experience, that you're able to hold that weight together and people can rely on you for that same thing. This creates mental health and communal health. And this is a very kind of fractured thing in a lot of societies, modern societies. And so this is something that we have to actually intend to build over time. And it might not be something that you just, wake up into or like necessarily have. It's something that is really built with trust and time and something that you may have to will into existence in your life and also be open to receiving it and the invitations where it already is. So those are just a few thoughts for dealing with the overwhelm is like what are your weight bearing structures that help you hold that? Because, for example, inside of mental catastrophe, like catastrophizing thoughts, that's the mind spinning. And what faculties do you have at a somatic and mental level to ground that and hold the intensity of that sensation? And how do you find that in community? So, that being said, there is this swirl, there is this kind of wet typhoon of late Pisces energy. And I'm going to take a specific angle with it on basically like the preciousness of life and contemplating death or the violation of life. Because this is very, you'll see why I'm making this point, but I'm going to just go into it. So I'm observing the collective and individuals in their own myriad ways contemplate horror, and in the ways that horror is familiar to me, I'll offer some philosophical framing for it. So let's start here. Have you noticed that archetypally in hero and villain stories, that the hero has way more to lose than the villain? So think about your, story of choice. I grew up with Harry Potter, so I can reach really easily for that reference. Harry generally remains connected to his heart and his friends. And in life and death battles, there's way more at stake for him than for Voldemort. Right? Voldemort, who cares more for power and isn't actually like emotionally bonded or emotionally invested in connection. So, for all of us, remaining in connection to what matters to us and what's most precious and vulnerable or even fragile inside, whether that's something in ourselves, and there's always a layer of that in the microcosm of ourselves, or whether it's out in the world, in our connections or in the world at large. Staying in connection to what matters and what's precious is much harder, more fulfilling, more rewarding ultimately, but it's harder than armoring against it. Right? A lot of the power of like the kind of work that I feel grounded in and that I share, if I'm like guiding people through meditations or somatic practices or something like that, is that even just touching a part of ourselves, like a true desire that we're holding, a true emotion or sensation in the body, it's so powerful to actually contact that and to be with it. Because our default setting, and there's a lot of biological reasons for this, social conditioned, intergenerational trauma reasons for this, it's more normal to keep a distance from those things and to live in a distraction or defense layer. So simply even making real contact with something inside or with like real deep connection is powerful and it's difficult. And developing the fortitude inside to be able to be with that is truly important work. Right. So the difference between actually touching that material versus just living in defense mechanisms or harder, crustier defense structures where you don't really feel the deeper thing. You don't really feel what you want. You don't feel fulfilled or connected to your life that much. And you're avoiding yourself with distraction and numbing. So when you're living in that reality, you have less to lose than when you're actually contacting the deep desire of your heart. When you're living in relationship to that, suddenly you have a lot more at stake. How this connects to the end of Pisces is that the last decan of Pisces deals with our biggest wishes and dreams. Wishes for the dream fulfilled, right? It's connected to the 10 of Cups in the tarot, this last decan, the last 10 degrees of Pisces, which pictures a joyful, dancing, happy family and their dog underneath a rainbow. It's radical moments of paradise that pop through the mundane like flashes of lightning. We strive to construct or manifest that vision of our happiness. often through romantic love or family life or whatever else is like the most high of high and the wishes of your heart. And in some moments, heaven and earth align and we experience ecstasy and bliss in the present moment, right? Because the same, family life or romantic love has many mundane and casual moments, but it's a sturdy enough structure of happiness that in certain moments, lightning flashes through it. And there's this peak moment of like, my life is amazing, or I'm so grateful for what I have, the life that I'm living. And then when you touch that lightning level of ecstasy or appreciation for your life and what you have, if your dream and your material life intersect and intertwine that way, then you have more at stake and quite a way to fall. So I have a Venus Mercury conjunction at the end of Pisces. Some of you have heard me process life experiences over the years, like the Hungry Ghosts of Paradise audio novella, for those of you that tuned into that, which was a story about tragic love, and like the kind of consciousness ride of going all the way up on the roller coaster and then all the way down. My 20s was riddled with ecstatic highs and tragic, to me at least, lows. A few times I touched the deepest layers of my heart that I'd ever yet met, only for it to be followed by a shocking turn of events that had left me blindsided and devastated. In retrospect, my sweetest moments were that much more tragic then, like an extra fragrant bloom of a flower before its untimely demise, if that metaphor even works. It's a plot device in films that if a pleasant state of happiness is to be disturbed, it should reach a peak of preciousness before it's ripped away. Saturn's gift to me as it passed over these planets in Pisces and my other planets in Pisces was that after much intricate, dedicated nervous system work and recalibration and internal erotic cultivation, I had more personal access to my heart, and life itself constellated new opportunities for connection and for happiness, new opportunities to go deeper and learn new lessons in love. This time without the same very fragile sense that an external person would or could stabilize my deepest wishes for me or rescue me from my internal states, from being with myself in however the material world is fluctuating. The tragedy, I put in quotes, the tragedy of my 20s is that I met external figures who showed me new possibilities and brought me to new places within myself, rescued me from my own limitations, my own sensed limitations, and then they would vanish. And I'd have to find my way back to hold and sustain what those connections had revealed to me. So, as an act of devotion to myself and my future partner, I discovered while Saturn was in Pisces earlier through the transit, how to really clear like the throne room of my heart from exes, right? Like this kind of identification with people of the past or those patterns or still referencing them, things like this. How to really clear that. So I wasn't holding people there in a way that was diminishing my availability or my ability to give and receive love. I really made a choice and I invested in the kind of education, mentorship practices, and just like deep prayer to give my loyalty to the present moment, right? To my own current of life force, my own unfolding, instead of these vestiges from the past, and really learn how to grieve and make that kind of change of the inner government in my heart, so to speak. And I did make a series on this channel about healing from heartbreak and moving on from people and kind of having a revolution of the heart that you might enjoy. And that's in the, if you go to the homepage and look for the playlist called Heart and Sex, you'll find those. There's 3 videos about healing from heartbreak. So then when life again revealed goodness to me, and in goodness in places that I was bracing for the worst due to historic experiences, I met the duality and the fear that exists around the good in life. I caught up with the ghosts that I thought I'd sent back to the light and realized that I was still terrified of love and loss, that I couldn't get close to what I really want without recalibrating my identity and maybe letting go of the idea that my life has been full of tragedy. Like, is that true? That I had to rewire and reconcile the content that swirls up within me when deeper parts of my heart are opened, or else I'll be stuck in a state of limitation and contraction. So when I think about the 29th degree of Pisces or the end of Pisces, that's the swirl that people are caught up in. It's like the rich, most saturated fullness of a cycle before them that probably has a lot of unresolved pain and lessons and devastations even, right? Like it's the very end of a cycle. So you've seen something come into full form and bloom, and you've also seen it go back into the earth or kind of go through its death process. And that is very heavy for people to contemplate. And it's spiritual, right? It requires a philosophical frame, because if you look at it from a limited kind of ego consciousness, it just feels like life gave you something and then it took it away. And how do we really grapple with that? We build meaning, we build religion and spirituality and whatnot. And traditionally, these kinds of meaning making things have been done in community. There have been elders and wise people and sages and like people that you go to help you sort things out. And I think that when people don't have that kind of anchor, they don't have that community, they don't have that real mentorship, and they just have like Reddit threads and ChatGPT and whatever that that is very kind of like spiritually unhygienic, spiritually ungrounded, because the content is there, right? So people either have to numb if they can't hold that material, or as it starts to pop out of its container because it's a lot, if people don't have the frameworks to really digest or metabolize that, the community, the elders, the support system to digest that, people are spinning. Yeah. And seeing that you're spinning can always be a good time to wake up to the reality that you need support, right? And often that support is available or is within reach. And I think this is, yeah, I'll leave it at that. So as my reflections crystallized, I can look back at all those events of my 20s with a lot more hindsight and recognize that although things appeared to be disasters at the time, I didn't actually lose what I thought I'd lost, and that my perception of those events was inaccurate in many ways, even a bit hysterical. Like, I love being a Mercury and Pisces person. It's very creative. It's given me a lot of gifts, but the capacity for overwhelm and putting too many things together and blending too many things together can be very, it's like holding too much. So the overwhelm was a bit boundless and uncontained, and I wasn't sober actually in my perception of the events. I ended up having a lot of like excess of content to metabolize and sort through. And this pinged me to lean into my Saturn and Aquarius natally, like to discover shock absorption technologies, to discover how to strengthen my nervous system, to discover the communal support, weight bearing structure in terms of the mentors and friends that I've collected over the years to be able to really grapple with this material and sort it into something of meaning and purpose, as opposed to just being lost inside of it. So that's the gift of overwhelm in some sense, is it does lead you to the edge of your capacity and open you to like where you can become part of something larger than yourself. So, another way I came to understand what had happened in those times in my 20s was that I'd experienced endings that were just true. They were just real. That is the reality. It's what happened before my ego had the resource to really digest those endings. I was struggling to understand loss and death, right? This is not unique for me. A lot of people who experience loss, it really pivots them into profound changes of consciousness. So, inside of the struggle to understand death and loss, I projected the fear onto my future that this was all I had access to. Instead of trusting the possibility that completely grieving or processing events or something in general, completely learning a lesson would lead to rebirth. Saturn's gift for me as it went through Pisces was that I gained the tools to harvest the wisdom from my life and life experiences so that I could have new and different life experiences. That's the kind of, this isn't just about having a positive attitude or mindset. It's the deeper, truer thing at the end of Pisces of the deathbed contemplation, of really making meaning of the solemnness of whatever the regrets or the mistakes or something were, forgiving yourself inside of that clarity, and having a change of heart, and also feeling into the reality of what matters to you and what mattered to you. Being able to hold that content in such a way that it actually changes your consciousness for the better and you make new and better choices after that. That doesn't happen through self-punishment. That doesn't happen through perfection. It's a very genuine reckoning with the whole story that we've been living out. And as for my earlier connection to horror, the loss of innocence or the loss of what's precious is horrifying in a sense. It certainly is to Pisces. It's the contrast between the reverence for life and the utter neglect or cruelty. It's the purposeful harm and the struggle to comprehend that, the chaotic nature of possibility itself, the sense that anything could happen, and the inevitability of death. All of these things cast a shadow upon the prized goods in life, the prized good in life. That we have to reconcile that inside, right? If you're the hero and not the villain, I don't like, it's a little bit too mythic to put it in that direction, but I like the metaphor of if you still care, that is a different weight to carry. That's a different thing to reconcile with than if you don't care. It's the inner battle to remain loyal to the life principle, even when there are so many reasons or triggers to shut down or to lose focus on what really matters. So many reasons to be discouraged and disheartened. The strength of having heart, the courage of having heart and staying connected. So, how this applies collectively for Saturn at the end of Pisces is that many people are going through a deeper psychic reorganization around meaning inside of deeper transitions that they are facing. People might be contemplating what really matters to them at a higher spiritual level, whether it's put in that frame explicitly or not, and also confronting all the baggage and limitations and fears around this. A lot of people wouldn't even necessarily recognize these things as baggage or fears. They might genuinely feel despair or hopelessness, or genuinely feel that they're clinging, right? That, like, I can't imagine my life if this thing doesn't work out the way that I want it to. I couldn't bear the disappointment of that and that existential gripping, right? These are limitations and fears that come up as soon as we move toward what really matters to us. And in so doing, it's like we end up at this kind of war with ourselves of what would it look like to be able to really be with the totality of our experience, what matters to us, the pain and disappointment, all of our emotions, our fullness of self, and be able to really embrace that full range experience. Because we have a lot of places where we're wired to shut down or reject or punish or block out or defend. And so we're really at odds with ourselves, and we can't just sit with ourselves in a quiet, dark room, you know? And when we are able to cultivate a type of consciousness where we can embrace our totality, then we have less to be afraid of because we can be with ourselves through the ups and downs of life. So, to be able to enter into the deeper layers of our own heart requires facing the grief and disappointment that lives at its gates, and where and why our heart hardened in the first place throughout our timeline. Having access to our own radiance, our own real deeper love that has a true creative power to it, doesn't mean that life offers us perfect conditions. It doesn't mean that we have to control our life to make it a certain way. It means that we have a strength, and in that kind of strength, we have not lost touch with the very things worth protecting. I think this is a profound type of psychological and spiritual integration to be able to touch the very things that make existing, worth it for you. That's a whole other can of worms, I think, too. There's very existential Pisces. But it's like, what are the things that are the higher joys of why you came to Earth? And how you can stay in touch with that kind of radical innocence inside of like your inner child or the purity of your heart, your own innocence. Be aware of what's happening around you, what's happening in your world. And instead of hardening to that radical innocence and radiance inside, being able to, or trying to like shut out the world in some way to protect this fragile part within. What it looks like to be in a more sober, connected relationship to these deeper matters. I think that's the psychological integration that maybe is widespread right now among many people, and a place where there's a lot of shakiness because, of course, there's so much emotional activation around what really matters to us that can spin out into all sorts of other psychological patterns. And ultimately, if we look at this from a spiritual layer and from like the dying well perspective and karma and reincarnation and rebirth, we're the only ones who can like really successfully digest our life experiences and glean the wisdom from them. We do need support to do that. Connection to what's beyond us. But resisting and fighting it or numbing it isn't the thing that makes that learning complete. So I'm curious. I forgot to say to like this video, subscribe, all this stuff, leave a comment. Please do. I would love to hear how this landed for you. But as Saturn's moving through this very rich, drenched, meaningful part of the zodiac, feeling into what kind of deeper existential recycling are you doing? How are you reconciling with your stories thus far? And experiencing a deeper click of, oh, I get it. I may not have liked those events at the time, or I was really struggling, but now with time and insight or healing, I see, I understand, I accept. Or maybe this thing hurts, maybe I still feel these emotions about it, but I accept that I feel that. Right? And like the kind of deeper integration and composting that happens when we really surrender to change, which is a symbolic form of death. Hence our meditation on dying well. I hope that you gleaned something from this, that it was supportive for you. Like this video, again, it's super, I should have said it at the beginning, but it's really helpful for the channel and bringing in people who would resonate with this. Thanks for watching. Thanks for making it this far. And I will see you again sometime here.